crazy beginning of the semester, but hanging in there, girl.
Wonderful. Well, I want to congratulate you on your new work. It is a beautiful book,
Thank
and
you.
we will certainly talk about soul culture, Black poets, books, and questions that grew me up. Go ahead, girl.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
So I want to ask you the beautiful graphic on the cover
Yeah.
of the woman, with the nice plush, luxurious
The
afro.
real
Is that
fro.
is that you? Is it you?
What a great no one has asked me that.
I've been thinking it all day, like, oh my God, is that
That's
her?
so interesting. In my heart of hearts, though, I have to tell you, in my heart of hearts, though, I mean, maybe it's me, but really it's kind of just an abstract representation of like all the things I was thinking that
Mm,
went into this kind of growing up that we allude to in the book, right? I
right.
mean, that cover art, I mean, we talked for months and months about the possibility. And the only thing that I told them that I was kind of staunch on was there has to be a Black woman on the cover. It certainly didn't have to be me,
Right,
but it was
right.
really important for me to have that image. And like the designers, Carol Chu and Alex Camlin, just came up with what I think is just the perfect image, the perfect font. I mean, I really love
I
the
really
work
love it.
that they did.
It just really catches the eye, the colors, the
Thank you.
blue and the black and then the
Yeah.
green. It's like, woo,
Yeah.
bam.
Yeah.
You
They
know
did.
you're
I
gonna,
mean,
yeah, it's a real treat. Like, books are just such jewels for us. And then, to know that what's inside is even, more in, inviting us, on the journey that you're creating. So yeah, it's a beautiful book. I just want to,
thank you
say
so
that right
much.
off.
I thank you so much. I mean, really and truly, it's a gift. All these people that really, put in time and effort on this thing, they really, really, really saw my dreams through. So I'm just grateful.
Wow. And so, Remica, your previous book
Hmm.
is Starlight and Error,
Hmm.
and that is a collection of poetry,
Yeah.
which won the, please correct me, is it Diode?
Oh,
Diode? Diode.
diode. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Diode Editions Book Award.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so, what was it like for you? Coming from, you are a poet, like, in my mind, that's how I know you, as a
Yeah.
poet.
Yeah.
And but your new work, this is nonfiction, this
Hmm.
is beautiful essays and weaving in your personal memories from childhood through your young adulthood, emerging as a poet. What was it like for you, the space in between your writing and creating and reading from Starlight and Error, released in 2017, now to your new work, collection of beautiful essays released in 2022? How have you, as a poet, a writer, a creative woman, changed in that space?
Oh.
And what brought you from poetry to this genre here?
So we just gonna jump right in, huh? Do it with no breaks. We gonna.
You know what? It was on my heart. And you know
Yes.
what? And let's just blame it on the spirit. I'm
What
going
a
with the spirit today.
fantastic question. No one has asked me that.
Well,
Um,
you're on Nerdacity, and we
right.
do things a little different here.
That's right. That's right. I love that question. It's so interesting. Starlight and Arrow was my third book of poems. And like you said, I'm a poet to the core, right? I
Mhm.
never imagined that I'd be writing a memoir. It wasn't on my radar. I will say that soul culture, these interviews had been in the works for a decade before even Starlight and Error came out. So I've been living with interviewing these Black poets that I just really loved for a long time. And eventually I thought that would turn into a collection. I would compile all
Mhm.
the interviews and that would be a thing. But after, I was working on Starlight and Error, and it was a book of love poems. I got married. I have step kids that came into the picture. We were like add water, instant family. My house went from 1 to 5.
Oh
I
wow.
yeah, I started thinking about, and really, my husband became a real sounding board for the kinds of things that I still wanted to do that I hadn't done yet. I published my third book of poems, and I said, I really have to get back to these interviews. It really matters to me that I make sure that I'm honoring my elders in the space as much as I can. And so, I thought, well, what's the way that we might do that? And so a shift came when I started thinking about writing essays that were kind of linked to some of those writers. So if I'd interviewed the brilliant Lucille Clifton, and I thought, what is it about Lucille Clifton's work that arrests all of us so, right? And for me, it was the intimacy that she wasn't afraid to tackle, especially when it came to the Black woman's body.
There.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so since I was now in a position where, I had wrestled with many of my own kinds of things in life, not only, thinking about career wise, but also, just coming into my own understanding of myself. I was able to kind of think about that craft wise and write something that might speak to the reason that I, had fallen in love with that work. And those essays ended up being the crux of soul culture.
Wow.
So my idea of honoring the elders in soul culture, now there's a line that says honor the elders' voices and honor your own. So I was trying to do both of those things. And I don't think I would have come to that unless I had already taken that journey through that third book and was looking for, ways to continue to reinvent myself as a writer.
Wonderful. And, okay. And you said did you say reinvent yourself?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Reinvention. Okay. So can we go back a little further? Okay.
Sure.
So now I'm wondering, I'm thinking about you, and you tell, you have memories in the book where you discuss, the books you read and how you were introduced to some of these poets. Like, I believe you read Quilting by Lucille Clifton, and you were introduced to the work maybe before you did the interviews.
Oh, yes.
So can you talk about how you came to poetry, your inspirations, and just, what did a poet's upbringing look like? What, you know what I mean? What was the child who becomes a poet? What does that look like? What was that path for you?
I love that. I mean, for me, it was first of all my mother reading to me from the time I was in the womb. So words were always really important, right? I was, I talk about this a little bit in soul culture, but I was the kind of kid that really read early on, memorized things early on. I also, was just fascinated with like the etymology of words and definitions. I used to carry around a little pocket dictionary when I was a kid, right? And for a while I was writing stories, right? Because that was kind of all I knew of what you could do with the page. And I had this wonderful teacher in fifth grade, Darlene Myers, that brought in Langston Hughes's Mother to Son, right? Brought in that poem to class. And it sounded, Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair, right? Come on. And it, and
Classic
so
Langston Hughes.
Langston is, he's writing, in the voice of like my grandmother. So I was like, I know this voice. You can do that. You can kind of tell someone that they have to keep going, but do it in a voice that's familiar to you. So between Langston Hughes and me being a reader and going to the library and just voraciously devouring anything I could find, one day a librarian bought me Eloise Greenfield's Honey, I Love. And that was the first book of poems I saw. But more important even than the poems inside, quite frankly, and this is interesting, it goes back to where we started with this cover image. There was a little Black girl on the front with big Afro puffs. And I was like, what is this? She looks like me. Like, what is she doing? And inside, she's writing poems about her everyday. And for me, those were the sparks. I won a little poetry contest in the fifth grade. And at that point, I just never looked back. Poems were the way that I expressed myself. I was writing in the medium. Now, by the time I got to college, I still thought, I don't know if anybody is like, I didn't know contemporary poets. I thought, just like folks think after Shakespeare, that's the end of the sonnet. I thought Langston Hughes
The
was the end
end.
of Black, right? Was
Right.
the end of Black contemporary poets until I found people like Lucille Clifton and Nikki
Mm.
Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez and Patricia Smith. And so once I found out that Tim Siebels, who was my teacher in undergrad, once I found out that this is a viable way to live my life in the world as it stands right now, there was no looking back.
Mm. And what you're talking about, thank you for that, is
Sure.
just this continuum. Langston Hughes continues to speak to us.
Come on.
Like you're saying, Lucille Clifton continues to speak to us.
Yeah.
And how wonderful you've had these people in your life. I mean, just the mentoring.
Yes.
Okay, but I'm holding back on getting into that. Like I want to, but I feel like there's more that we must know, Remica.
Sure.
Okay. So now, so you were reading Eloise Greenfield, and I know in the book, because I'm thinking about things that I read, and you talked about Mildred Taylor, and I was like, no, she didn't.
Yes, Mildred D. Taylor. Honey, let me tell you. Yeah, I was rereading Mildred D. Taylor last year. She put out another book in the series, another book in the Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry series.
Yes.
And I was like, y'all didn't tell me.
Let the circle be unbroken.
Come on,
child.
That's my favorite too. Stop, DuEwa.
I mean, I'm reading that and I'm like, no, she read these books too.
Oh, yes.
And it was so much a part of me that when I became a K-12 teacher, I just had to, even though I had to do, there were my colleagues were like, the language in that book is so difficult. You're really going to have to do a lot of scaffolding to unpack for the kids. I'm like, look, they will get it.
That's right.
This is their people. We're
Children
going back
are so much smarter than we give them credit for anyway.
Are. Well, that's not 6th grade vocabulary. It doesn't have to be.
Doesn't need to be. Thank you. No, please.
But anyway, I just was excited as reading your experience. It's just like, okay, she got that education. Yes. You got that what the children who become poets and writers get.
Yeah.
You had that curiosity and that passion, and you were asking those questions. And that's what really touched me as I was reading. Okay. So Remica, you went to college and you mentioned you studied with Tim Siebels. Is it Siebels?
Yep.
Okay. And, you had other teachers, and you also talk about Cave Canem.
Yes.
So I know I'm skipping some of your life, but I realize, Cave Canem has been a big part of your life as a fellow. And, can you talk about the impact? You mention in your book that you all were somewhat like, I think you might have said scared of your teachers because they were the cream of the crop.
That's right. I mean, Cave Canem really, I say in the introduction to the book that it's not a book about Cave Canem, but it's a book that wouldn't exist without Cave Canem. It's a book that's in the wake of this wonderful experience I had as a fellow, and then I went back and worked as a working scholar there for a few years, and so I extended my stay more than some of the other fellows who got those 3 years. But every time we walked into that summer retreat space where you're going to walk in and you get to work with 6 or 7 of the best poets in the country, people that you have been reading often in isolation for years.
Sure.
And you step into this space and there sits before you, Patricia Smith or Cyrus Cassels or Ed Robertson, or, I mean, it just goes on and on. The Kwame Dawes was sitting in the room once. So in the book, I talk about the fact that we were particularly scared to sit in the room with Erica Hunt.
Oh, yes.
Another brilliant
I enjoyed
poet that I
that.
interviewed.
You were like, here comes wait, where are my notes? Wait. Just, humor me for a minute. You were like, where are my notes? I must, because I really enjoyed reading that.
Okay.
That you all, you called her a language poet.
That's right. That's
one
right.
who veers away from the short form narrative most of us were writing and more toward the lyric.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you assume that she would judge you in a certain way, but then she,
right.
She ended up giving y'all something. Okay, I won't spill it, but I'll let you tell it, Remica.
Well, you can. You can definitely say. Listen. I don't mind spoilers. I hope spoilers get people to the book, so we can talk about whatever. But for sure, Erica Hunt was one of the first workshop leaders that I had anywhere who included praise as part of her technique, right? Like that was part of her teaching. And I say that because I went to Cave Canem after I went to graduate school and after I had gone to other instances, so it just, we're all, quite frankly, finding ways just recently to reinvent what that workshop space looks like.
Sure.
And so, but that to me in particular, because we just thought, like, I'm not writing stuff that's cool enough for Erica Hunt, right?
Right.
Like, I'm writing my little poem, this happened and this happened, the end, right? But she is threading, like collages together that, are just kind of blowing our minds. But what she was doing was really, and she talks about this in our interview and in that essay, Who Raised You in Soul Culture, she says, I just was never interested in remaking myself in the workshop. I wanted to make you the best person you could be. So when somebody took in a poem that she thought was particularly resonant, no matter the style, she would take that poem around and show it to other teachers and and it really bolstered us. I remember talking about her practice with other poets, particularly, I don't name names in the book in this instance, but a poet who's just passed, who's very dear to us, Camila Aisha Moon and I, we used to talk about this all the time, about Erica Hunt and the way she praised our work and made us feel like we were worthy of the space.
Wow.
And that is something that I now take into my practice in any workshop space. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Because sometimes you may take a course or a workshop or even be an MFA and, you feel as though, one, I have to prove myself. I really need to meet the standard that this person is telling me I need to meet. And, you go through all of that. So it's wonderful that you had such an affirming experience and you discussed that, about Cave Canem as a whole. So that's definitely worth saying. And so, Remica, so now, how do you balance your work? Before we get even deeper into your book, you are also currently at a university, and how do you balance being, part educator and leader with or not part, I just mean, educator, leader, wearing those hats, but then also you're a creative, you're a scholar, a student, you interview and have done your research on all these wonderful poets. How do you balance those parts of yourself?
Ooh, that's something I just did a little IG live with my MFA students today. Such a good question because I was just doing an IG live this afternoon with my MFA students, and we were talking about how you find balance, right? In the MFA, outside of the MFA, beyond it. And I talked to them a lot about the fact that I'm an administrator. I'm not a tenure track professor. I actually oversee a large, that has saved me over time. I've been in administration for, the last 10 years, and I still teach, a class every other semester for students as well. Cause, students, they just open up the world to you. So I would really miss the classroom if I wasn't there. Plus you can't tell other faculty how they should do things in their classroom. You don't have one of your own. They're not having it, right?
They're not going to listen,
having
right?
it. Absolutely not. And as well they shouldn't, because you don't know what's going on, right? And so for me, one of the things that I am now able to do after a pretty long career is build in research time. I tell people all the time, I have research days on my calendar, like in my box. It is, if you look on my calendar and you're looking for space for a meeting, you will see blocks of time that say research. And those are specifically for reading, writing, finishing projects. And I think it's a practice that all of us should engage in. If we start now putting that 1 hour a week on the calendar, think about the 52 hours we'll be able to spend, even if we have all of these other demands, really pulling at our time. And so for me, treating writing like it's not a side gig,
Right.
treating writing like it is the fount for me that it is.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That's the way that I continue to be able to like balance my space and time. If I'm not reading, I'm certainly not writing, but also I don't feel fed. So I have to have time for those things.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And I appreciate that because the next question I'm going to ask you connects to that. Like, I've been asking the writers, with the pandemic, we've been dealing with that
Yeah.
for a while, a few years. So when we were on lockdown, like,
Mm-hmm.
how did that impact, if at all, your writing practice, your creative process, if at all, or what that was like for you, with the way everything was changing for us?
Oh, it absolutely did impact my practice. I was locked down in the house with my husband and my son who was in high school. We had to go completely virtual, so we're all working in different rooms of the house and trying to just figure out, in addition to taking care of parents from a distance and all of those things. It was a scary time for everyone, and I will tell you, two big things happened. One, soul culture happened. This book was written
Mm,
in its entirety during the pandemic. March was when I decided we were, locked down. I started having that conversation I mentioned earlier with my husband. What am I, what's the next thing? And he said, well, you
right.
got those interviews. What are you going to do? So I really buckled down, wrote a proposal, found a wonderful agent, Larissa Mello Piankowski, and started moving on from there. And because then it was just the interviews and these craft essays, but what people were interested in, we remember what else was happening in 2020. We're
Mm,
living in a double pandemic. They were really, oddly enough, interested in like my own voice, the Black interior woman's voice.
there you go.
So that's how all of these interviews actually morphed into essays and became a memoir. So really, all of this writing, the bulk of it was done during the pandemic, and it was a gift because it was something for me to laser focus on, because I was so frazzled in those first few weeks. I couldn't even read, like I couldn't sit with a book of poems. I didn't have the attention span for it. I was so
Sure.
anxious.
Mm.
And I went back to like brilliant Black women romance writers like Jasmine Guillory. She really saved my life during
Oh,
the pandemic.
wow.
I'm telling you, because I had to find something that one, I had to have some clear idea that this was going to be okay at the
Mm.
end.
There you go.
Right. And that's what romance as a genre will give you.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I just had to have something that I could piece together and have an enjoyable narrative, a story that could get me through until I could build my way back up to different things. And so, the reading was kind of halted for me. That was a scary time. But once I could get back in my reading groove and once I found my agent, it gave me something very particular to be working towards. So I didn't feel like I was standing still. So, in some ways, the pandemic for me as an artist ended up being a gift. I would have never imagined that to be the case early on, but it was.
Wow, I love that. And, because you sound like a very disciplined person.
I
And
try.
when you said you've got research days and then
Mm-hmm.
you've got, you have your administrator hat and you
Yep.
have, your family,
Mm-hmm.
you prioritize and
Oh, yeah.
you made that pandemic work for you rather than you working for it,
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes.
my podcast was born during the pandemic. I too was also wrestling with, what can I do? What can,
Yeah.
in addition to the other stuff. And so I feel you on that. The Black woman's voice is so powerful and we have
Mm.
so many rich stories to tell.
Yeah.
And so I thank you for your bravery in not only
Oh,
telling your story in soul culture, but telling the stories of others, other
oh.
poets. So Thank you, Remica. But this isn't the end. I just wanted to say thank you.
No, I
You know.
appreciate you. And really, like, let me just really and truthfully, let me just return the favor, because when we first started talking about doing this, I think I mentioned to you, these podcasts were something my graduate student put me on to right before the pandemic started. And so I was really searching, craft talks ended. There were no conferences. I
Right.
couldn't find other writers to like sit with because we were all isolated.
That's
So
right.
podcasts, listening to other writers, was the way that I still felt like I was in community at the time.
Mm.
And so that's how I stumbled upon your podcast and was like, thank goodness people are out here doing this work, because otherwise we'd be lost. There would be no way for us to communicate about craft in the space that we're in. So really, thank you. It was a gift for me.
Wow. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Remica, now that brings me to, you've been fed. This is what I'm getting from you. You
Yeah.
have been fed, child, and you have
Mm-hmm.
absorbed and studied. And this is how you're able to give us such a beautiful work with soul culture. So let's talk a little bit more about these interviews and what knowing and meeting and having such connection with these writers. Mentioning, I took note of Honore Fanon Jeffers. Did I
Yeah.
pronounce her name?
Yes, you got
Okay.
it.
So I gather that you all have a close connection and a
Yeah.
really good friendship.
Yeah.
And then just, I love the reflection that you gave on each writer and like, really kind of jewels of what you took from each in terms of your learning, but also what you recognize as what they give to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you talk about interviewing? Was it your first thought interviewing for the sake of recording what they've been doing, but then also you have your own curiosity, and it's almost like, I mean, I'm just on the outside looking in, but I feel as though, wow, she's getting fed through these interviews, in
Oh, yeah.
addition to giving us these poets, these amazing people. So it's like a twofold value here.
Yeah.
Can you talk about this experience of the interviews that you say took place a decade ago, but then putting the book together and just all of that coming together?
Yeah. I mean, this whole process, this getting fed, right, started because I studied with E. Ethelbert Miller in graduate school. He's one of the poets that I interview, of course. And I was just, in awe of all these other writers. He would bring in a writer and I would just say, oh my God. I think one time I said, oh my God, like Avan Jordan is just magical.
Oh, yeah.
Sonia Sanchez is just magical. And this is long before Black Girl Magic, he flipped it on me and he said, but if they're magical, how do you chart a path to magical? Like, you have to understand that these are just like living, breathing folks who are doing the thing you want to do. So you got to get over this awe syndrome. You got to interview these folks. And I thought, that is crazy. I am not going to ask. Why would they say yes? First of all, they don't know me by any means. And lo and behold, Black poets are so generous. Every single one of them said yes when I
Wow.
reached out for an interview. And I'm not talking about like small interviews. These are interviews that were sometimes 20, 25 questions. Some of the interviews lasted for 4 to 6 hours with some people over days.
Wow.
I was asking them about their early childhood all the way through their creative works. Some of these folks are 30 books in by the time I'm asking them questions,
Indeed.
right? So it was like real generosity, just like heart work, that they decided to they saw the hunger in this young poet and were kind enough to kind of let me sit with them. And I told them, my hope is to publish these interviews in magazines. And I'm really just asking about craft because I'm trying to learn myself. And so that's what I went on to do. So the more that I interviewed folks, the more that I really got to know why and how people's trajectory influenced their writing. And that was just fascinating to me. And so that was, a kind of the thing that continued to feed me. I never thought it would be 10 poets. I always thought, well, I'll just do these three that I really love. And then another came along, and then somebody else saw another interview and said, well, have you ever thought about this? So it was really just, the generous spirit of others. And then I just started realizing, I can trace my own path through what they've taught me. And so that's how it
Wow.
was kind of a full circle deal.
It's beautiful. And you mentioned craft, and that's one of the things I picked up in the book is that
Mm.
while you were discussing, I love reading about the in the Sonia Sanchez chapter where you discuss you met her at Furious Flower
Yeah.
and she had a party and just what that was like being there with her,
Yeah.
at her home. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, wow, how amazing is
Yeah. Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So it's like you're getting that closeness and that connection and vibe. But then
Mm-hmm.
there is the craft side.
Yeah.
So one of the things you mentioned about you talk about Carolyn Rogers and Ntozake Shange and
Mm.
Sanchez breaking the rules of English grammar and syntax.
Ooh, yes.
I thought that was so important to share. I've once shared a poem of Ntozake Shange's with my students, and the first thing they notice is, oh, she's writing in lowercase. She's
Yes.
writing, like, does this mean anything? And I'm like, yes, I'm glad you noticed this. Let's get into it.
Right.
So tell me about the value of learning these different styles and the history of these poets and their styles and what they're bringing and what it meant for you as a poet who's, interviewing them and meeting them and
Mm.
studying their work.
Oh, that is a great question. I mean, what's interesting is, so the way that I would conduct these interviews is I would really immerse myself in the work of the poet, starting from like kind of their most recent book that I was reading and work my way back. So when I was interviewing Sonia Sanchez, I was really in love with her book Morning Haiku, which is, like these lovely, it's all haiku. There's some songku, there's some tanka. She's kind of moved into her formalist space, much quieter poems. So by the time I get all the way back to the Black Arts Movement poems to like Homecoming, I'm like, Lord have mercy, this woman is cussing people out. There's slashes. She's using, broken, Black English,
Girl,
AAVE,
the F
verb.
bomb.
Come on.
I was shocked the
Listen.
first time I heard her say the F word. I
And I
was like, what?
and I was like, oh, this is how people know Sonia. Like, this is the Sonia Sanchez. This is why she's famous.
That's right.
Right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, because she was really spitfire. There's one little paragraph. Can I read this little paragraph from
Please,
Soul
because
Culture?
I was going to
That's
ask you
Sonia's
after
voice.
this.
Oh.
Like, can we get I didn't know if, because, sometimes when a writer's book is so new and this being
No.
nonfiction, I didn't know if you are able to like read
Oh, yes,
parts of it,
absolutely. It's sitting in front of me, but nobody has asked that question yet, like the specifics on craft. And when
Okay.
I asked Sonia about Homecoming, I said, listen, these are poems that, if I took them in the classroom today, I'll probably still get in trouble. Like,
Exactly.
these are not. And so this was her response to that, to the kind of work that they were doing and just like really being outrageous in the way that they talked and trying to get young people's attention. She says, in my book Homecoming, you see concentrated bloodletting. We had to alert people who'd not been alerted to what was going on. When I got up on the stage and said, I'm Black, people booed me because people wanted to be considered Negroes with a capital N. So you had to use curse words because then you engaged people. When I used curse words, I engaged the younger people and they said, "Ooh, stop. Look at that." Then after I got them engaged, I didn't have to curse anymore.
Damn.
Right? Like, so what she's doing is breaking down like what's happening. She's like, listen, there were young people who were putting their lives on the line in the middle of the civil rights movement and the Black arts movement. And we're trying to not only alert them to history, but let them know like your voice is an important voice. And the way you arrest them is this way. But I'm years from now, she told me, and as an aside in the interview too, she was like, well, if I was writing the same book I was writing, 30 years ago, that would be a sad situation. Right. So that's why we
Right.
talked about like the shift that happens over time. Does your house have lions? She's writing these beautiful kind of long, expansive elegies and like prose poems. So she's doing everything, but she's like, you grow as a poet. Your intention changes, your audience changes. And also, once you get people's attention, you can really do whatever you want.
There you go.
Right. So, I mean, those kinds of
hook.
things. Yes.
You got to hook them.
Yes. Right. And that reminded me as a poet, I can do whatever I want once I get people's attention. So if I decide I want to write in the voice of my aunties, that's what I'm going to do, because somebody needs to hear it. Right. If I decide, I got to have an expletive in a poem, even if my mama get mad, somebody needs to hear it. Right. So it really freed me up to start understanding that nothing is off limits in poems as long as you write it well. Right.
I love that. And that's making me think back to your experience with Erica Hunt. Her supporting you to be the best you.
Yeah.
Like, let's bring your voice out. That's very, encouraging. And so, Remica, do you have any other parts you'd like to read, or even poems of your own, or other excerpts from the book?
Sure. And it really and truly, if there's something you in this book deep, DuEwa. So if there's something that
girl,
like
I took notes
read,
like it was, my literature review for my dissertation, child. I was like, girl, we're gonna have an interview.
You like it, I love it, honey. Let me read, because we keep going back to that Erica Hunt essay. Let me just read a little piece from that essay. So it's called "Who Raised You?" In the Black community, that's a double-edged question, right? Like it can have many connotations, but it's like, girl, who raised you? Why you acting like that?
Right.
But
it could be shade, or it could generally be a genuine question.
That's
like,
right.
Who your folks?
Who your people?
That
That's
you?
right.
Okay.
That's right. Right. So it's all about, my encounter with Erica Hunt and what she taught me about, of course, praise and practice, but also what she taught me about balance and motherhood, and how I had to work through some of that balance myself. So I write a lot about my children in the essay. And in this particular moment, I'm scared for my son because Trayvon Martin has happened. My friend Romaine Brisbane has been killed by police in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm writing a poem after I get a call from the principal. So I'll read that little poem, and then I'll read just a little paragraph beyond it.
And can you tell me what page you're on?
Of course.
I would love to follow along with you.
I love that. I'm on 128 and 129.
Okay. Great. I'm there. Thank you.
Okay. So here we go. We warn our son not to run from the police. I've just, in the book, seen some boys who are darting through the neighborhood, running from a gas station, and the police are chasing them. They will shoot you if you run and say they had a reason, my husband and I explain. Don't get into trouble. Don't do anything that could make you seem suspicious, wrecked, reckless. But his skin makes him seem troublesome in this life. When I get a call from the school about some fleeting incident, I'm racked by the unforgivable and write. Here's the poem. The principal calls, and I understand I will be held accountable. Will mothers ever be anything other than tired? Will I ever be a mother other, not tired? Will mother be tied to other forever? Will ever be other, and mothers be never? Never tired, ever mother, always other, only never. I am ever other, ever mother, always tired, never done. Only son, only daughter, always tied to forever. I am an only daughter. I have an only son. We are ever other, one and one.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you so much. And then, I wrote this little kind of paragraph to kind of fuse some of those things that I was thinking about on 133. It says, mothering is fluid practice. Poeting is fluid practice. Sometimes you are so small and the world is so big that you have to write your own history and hold on to it. In her poem, A Coronary Artist, Hunt says, one becomes an adult without knowing the details of how it was done. Every time I put pen to page, I am hoping to save myself from forgetting, maybe save others the trouble of lying about what happened later. Worry haunts me now. With age comes responsibility and the assurance that people are nothing if not hungry and misguided. I'm writing for my children's sake more than for my own, just like my mother worked the night shift for many years, mostly because I was born. Only grace lets poetry put food on a table, fill a classroom with unexpected fervor, or make us feel as useful as our mothers in our strained, imperfect art. This work lets me take back the dead and rile the living. It's what keeps many of us from shouting every minute of the day.
Mm. Wow. I love the line, I'm writing for my children's sake more than for my own.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that makes me think of, Trayvon Martin and Remain, did you say Remain
Yeah.
Brisbane?
Brisbane. Yep. Romaine
Brisbane,
Brisbane. Yeah.
and all of these unfortunate cases of brutality. It's just been
Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And I mean, I talk about in the essay that, really, really kind of works its way to Romaine. And it's all about Patricia Smith. It's called Standing in the Shadows of Love. Because me and Patricia Smith can't get together without talking about Motown. And so,
And you did call quote Motown Crown of Sonnets.
yes, yes,
Yes, I wrote
yes.
that. I was like, oh, that's what's up.
Listen, Patricia's Motown Crown is insane. If you haven't seen it, please go find it. My goodness. But
Okay.
but she, I mean, really, we were talking about music and all the things that bring us together in every Soul Train line. But what we really got to was the fact that sometimes you have an incident in your life. Sometimes it's an incident of violence. Sometimes it's a really harried mistake that makes you restart. You have to start your life over in many ways. You have to rebuild. And that's certainly what's happening with a lot of these martyr mothers who are losing their children. That's what happened with Patricia Smith when she lost her father, and then when she had to step down as a journalist and started her life as a poet. In many ways, I felt like that's, what was happening to me as I got married and had to learn how to be a mother. But also after losing a dear friend while I was still trying to figure out how to
Mm.
raise, a Black son in America. So it was, it was a scary time, but the words, like trying to wrestle with those questions and make sense of them,
Mm-hmm.
that's what keeps me going to the page. That's the only thing that poetry does for me, is it helps me wrestle with questions. It doesn't even give me many answers, right? But
Wow.
it helps me clearly articulate the questions I have about the world. And for that I'm grateful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And there's that part in the title of your book, Questions That Grew Me Up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Okay, Remica, now can you please tell us, and that was so rich, by the way, the discussion
Thank
and
you.
the reading that you gave us. Wow. Okay.
Oh, please. Those questions, honey, you came not to play. That's what I love. Like, and the book
Girl,
just came out last week. So, I still haven't really talked to many people who've gotten to read it. I know you had notes, honey.
oh,
Okay.
okay. Well, look, you are on your tour. One thing I can
Yes.
say, you on your social media game
Listen.
post.
Ooh,
You
child, I'm
gotta. I
hustling.
I think you have something going on tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. I'm
I
like,
do. I have a reading, an in-person reading with Tim Siebels.
oh gosh, that is
Last
so
poet of the book. We're
crazy.
gonna do it. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I hope that you all will record that, because that's one for definitely for the books.
I hope so. We're gonna try. We're trying to record almost everything on the. I had one deal with Ethelbert. So everything that I do with one of the poets that's in the book, we're trying to make sure that it's saved for posterity too.
And you know what? I wanted to say to you, I'm glad you mentioned that as well, because the way the book, because you have, the really nice black and white photos of the poets,
Yeah.
and the book for me is so conversational in that you're having a conversation with the reader about your life, you're growing as a writer, as a poet, and then you're having conversations with the poets themselves. And it makes me think of this as a documentary.
Oh, that makes me happy.
So,
who knows?
do you know what I'm saying?
I was about to say, we just got to find the right people, DuEwa,
There you go.
to make that happen.
I mean,
I really am thinking about ways, I was thinking about what are ways that we can get multiple poets, of the poets that are here in a room, just so we can like have a conversation. Pick any 3 of the 10
one
at
after
any given
another,
moment.
And Natasha Trethewey at 12 noon.
Come on. Come on,
Erica
Forrest
Hunt
Hamer
at
there.
1 p.m.
That's
let's go. Let's keep it rolling. Let's go. Right.
Yeah, that's the dream. So I'm going to try to find a way to make that happen, to at least do a panel or, of soul culture poets. I would love that.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'll definitely, I'll retweet that. I'll repost that.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And so, Remica, we're getting to one of my favorite questions, which is, what do you have coming up next, other than your wonderful event tomorrow with Tim Siebels?
Well, next on the writing front is back to the real thing. So I have a book of poems that is done and is about to be shopped around. It's called Room Swept Home. I've been working on it for again in 7-8 years probably, but thinking about it for a lifetime. It's about 2 of my grandmothers and how, oddly, even though they're from different sides of my family tree, one paternal, one maternal, they crossed paths in Petersburg in 1941.
What?
So listen.
What?
Okay, so now we got to break it down.
Did they know each other?
Absolutely
come
not.
on.
Absolutely not. Listen, it gets even better. So my paternal great grandmother, Minnie Folks, is interviewed for the WPA ex-slave narratives in 1937, where she lives in Petersburg.
Okay.
My maternal grandmother, at 18, is diagnosed with water on the brain and is sent to the Central Asylum for the Lunatic Insane, a Negro insane asylum that's in Petersburg, and they're within 3 miles of each other.
What?
Right? Of course, not knowing, that they're eventually going to, make up the stretch strain of folks who makes up me. But that, as a poet, it was just too much for me to bear. I was like, wait a minute.
That's too much for me, and I don't even know them.
Right? And then once I started digging into their stories, of course, it gives me all of this information about what the real, Black womanist, kind of feminist struggle has been throughout the country from, the 1850s all the way up through present day. So I trace their lineages and I talk about their lives. And then there's a whole suite of sonnets, talk about, back to that crown of sonnets. There's a whole suite of sonnets called the Lose Your Mother sonnets that really wrestles with, how I came to their story and how, they birthed me in many ways. So listen, honey. So that's the next book. Room Swept Home is the next book of poems. And, when it's actually somewhere, I'll absolutely let you know.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And please tell us, Remica, how we can follow you, how your audience can generally connect with you and find more about your work and your events.
Oh, the best way to do it is on Instagram or Twitter. My handle is at Remica Writer, RemicaWriter, at Remica Writer. I'm still, fairly new to Twitter. So come over there, tweet at me. I'll talk to anybody because, I'm just getting into
I love that. Come tweet. So much fun. Come tweet at me. It was like you were saying, come holla at me.
Yeah, really. Come tweet me. Yeah. So that's the easiest way. And my website is there. It's just RemicaBingham-Risher.com.
Wow. Amazing. Remica, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful treat, and I look forward to continuing to follow you in your work and support what you're doing. And, I wish you the best of success for your new book, Soul
Thank you so
Culture.
much.
And you were just listening to episode 43 of Nerdacity Podcast featuring my guest, Remica Bingham-Risher. I hope you'll pick up her new book, Soul Culture, Black Poets, Books, and Questions That Grew Me Up. Visit Remica's website at remicabinghamrisher.com and also follow her on Instagram and Twitter. Tweet me, Nerdacity Podcast, on Twitter at NerdacityPod1 and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can also follow Nerdacity on Instagram at Nerdacity Podcast, NerdAcityPodcast. Visit and like our Facebook page, Nerdacity with DuEwa. Thanks so much for listening, and hope you'll also visit my author website at DuEwaFrazier.com and follow me on Instagram at Dr. DuEwa Wright. Thanks for listening. Take care.